Alright, so welcome to day whatever it is 4, I think I said. Working on this Tamiya Zero. If you've watched some of the previous streams, there were some things that I've done since my last stream that I said I'd probably do off camera just to streamline the process a little bit. So I'll start today by showing some of that, what I've done, so that it's not totally blind to you guys who've been watching. And then we will do some paint masking and painting of the upper airframes coloring. So a lot of kind of detailed work with some tape and then some a good bit of airbrushing for the stream today. So it may not be as long as some of my past streams. It kind of depends on how long the tape takes, the taping or the masking takes. But we'll see how that goes. So to kind of show you a little bit of what I did since the last stream. So in the last stream, we got the fuselage together. I can't remember if I got the wings on while the camera was on or not. The camera may have died before I finished that. But anyway, as you can see, we do have the completed airframe here. And as we kind of expected, with the way the join was not quite perfect, we let me put my tweezers so I can point with something that's sharp, but I seem to have misplaced them, which is odd. I'm sure they'll show up, but the good news is I've got plenty of those. Sorry, that's sidetracked there. The join between the fuselage halves was not perfect. Tried though we might, it was not quite as clean as we would like. So there was a seam running down the dorsal part of the fuselage that we needed to get rid of. And the same thing was true, and even more so down here, because if you remember when I removed some of the plastic that attached the body to the plastic trees that they come on, I removed a little bit too much, and so there were some gaps. And so if we just focus in on the underside here, you can see no gaps. And there's a little bit of one that you can still see there. In the long run, I'm just not going to care about it, to be honest. But this whole thing, there was a seam here. There was 3 or 4, I can't remember, little gaps that were showing up because the plastic had just been removed by just a little bit too much. So what we did was we filled it. There's a lot of different ways to fill gaps in plastic like that. You can use basically what almost amounts to molding clay, which is kind of the old way to do it. It sucks, I hate it, so I don't use it anymore. I've also done where you would take some super glue and get it into the gap, and then use an accelerant so it dries really fast, but it hasn't fully hardened yet, and then you can sand it down, and that works, but it's also kind of a pain in the butt. But then my father stumbled upon this. It's plastic putty from Vallejo that hopefully you can see, and this stuff is amazing. It flows kind of like white glue, like Elmer's glue, and it's very easy to kind of push down into the gap you're trying to fill, and then you can shape it a little bit, and then it just wipes up with water. Then as it dries, you can actually shape it and mold it a little bit more, sand it down if you've got a little too much there. It's amazing stuff. So that's what I will be using, at least until I stumble upon something that seems better. So really happy with that, the way that turned out. So like as you can see, other than the one place where I didn't quite get enough there, there's really no seam there anymore. So it worked out really well. So we added some here. We added a little bit of fill here to smooth that step because that piece just didn't quite fit right. There were a few other places that we added some filler just to make things look like they should. But overall, the fit was very good. So we did all that, and we primed it with just the surface primer to get the surface nice and ready for accepting paint. We also do this to check for those gaps. So after I filled it, I then went back to those seam lines and I sanded it. And these are all the sticks that I use to sand, going from extremely coarse to medium to fine to extra fine, and then you can even go even finer than that, where I have basically these are little sandpaper pads going from 3200 grit all the way down to 12,000 grit, and this is basically a polishing pad. So after we filled the gaps, we came back and we sanded down that seam so that there was no height difference between the two halves, because that's really what we were seeing. There was a height difference where the two halves were not quite perfectly aligned. So we sanded that down, cleaned up all the dust, and then primed it to make sure that gap was well and truly gone. And as you can see, it's well and truly gone. I even managed to not lose the actual fuselage lines that should be there, the panel lines that should be there. So that worked out really well. I'd also screwed up a little bit and got a little too much of my glue in the wing root here, in this nice rounded corner. And it actually kind of melted the plastic a little bit, and then me reacting fast and trying to fix it. I'm not talking about this little dot here, you actually can't see the problem anymore. It was right here in this corner. I tried to kind of get the glue off, and I actually made the problem worse. So I ended up having to use my sanding sticks, and I actually had to cut them to get this little bit of an angle here, so I could get in there and sand that without sanding the wing or the fuselage where it didn't need to be. So it took a little bit of sanding to get everything down the way I wanted it to. There are still some areas that I'm not completely happy with the way they turned out, but overall quite pleased with the final results. I was a little bit too heavy with the primer in some places, but not so much so that I'm going to worry about that. So once the primer dried, and then I did a few more things. I masked off the interior space just with a piece of index card and some tape, so that as I was spraying, all that work I did on the inside doesn't now become whatever the body color is, right? So one way to do this is just to cover that space. Another way some people will do it is they'll actually go ahead and mount the canopy glass, and then it's covered, right? So you don't have to worry about it. Since I want to leave my canopy open, that doesn't work for me, and I could use maybe some white glue and kind of tack it into place. But I end up just kind of, especially with a small opening like this, it was pretty easy just to cut a piece of index card and get it taped in there nicely. And then this back component here was also supposed to be that same interior green that we had painted the insides already, but couldn't paint until we got the fuselage halves together, because we didn't know if there was going to be a seam there. Turns out the seam here was great because I focused on this part here. It got worse towards the tail, so it was poorly aligned a little bit towards the tail, but good here in the middle. But that worked out pretty well because we had no seam here, so it made it nice and easy. I didn't have to lose any of the detail of the riveting and things that are here. So we painted that with the airbrush. We also painted the front end of the cockpit area the semi-gloss black, like it's supposed to be. This is like an anti-glare coating that they would use in many aircraft to get that done. You notice that I didn't care that I got outside of that area, because we're actually going to paint all that today, hopefully, the correct color, and the paint will just cover it very nicely. And because the airbrush puts down such a thin coat, we're not worried about it building up too much and losing detail, so we can do that. So we'll mask this off today, set the black as well, and we'd be able to paint the top color. So we got those painted. We also painted the underside, and for that we used Japanese navy gray, actually kind of a green gray. Tamiya actually has a particular spray can you could use. AS2, I think, is the number for it. But I have a nice airbrush. I can put down the paint much lighter coats, so it doesn't lose some of these fine panel line details. So like, hopefully you can see some of those details in there in the panel lines. If you put too much paint in there, they're gone. You'll never see them again. So using the airbrush, I'm able to keep the coat of paint on here very light, so that I don't lose those details. You'll also notice that I did the same thing with the wheel wells. I filled parts of them with index card and just some masking tape to try to protect as much of that that blue color, that kind of blue-green color. That's the interior of the wheel wells for that purpose. Ultimately, these parts of the flaps will also be that blue color, and the way we'll do that is we'll mask around it and then just spray the blue. But that will probably be one of the last things that we do. One of the things I decided not to worry about is this little lip here. There is a lip, and I've read in a lot of reviews this is one of the few fitting issues with this particular kit. I decided I don't care. Well, hey Clary, I'm just going to leave it. It's a minor lip. I'll do some weathering down here, and it'll be a little less obvious. But I didn't want to lose all the riveting detail, so I decided just to leave that be. I also masked the little port here. This is where either the drop tank will be inserted or the pilot could look down and see. So we're going to leave that. We wanted to make sure that we didn't get paint on the underside of that clear plastic piece that we so painstakingly mask off early on in the build. So that's mostly what I did with the body. I also painted a whole slew of other things: the insert that goes here, the tail wheel, the exteriors of the landing gear covers, the undersides of the flaps that we'll insert here, because I'm actually making it to where the flaps will be open, sitting on the ground as if they're being maintained, perhaps. So there's a number of things over there in my airbrush hood that I will have to move later once we actually get to painting, that I also put their paint colors on, because it's all the same color. And then the final thing I did yesterday, I actually did do this yesterday, was started getting the canopy ready. So the canopy for this kit comes in 3 parts. You can see here on the instructions. The forward part, this is the sliding part that I'll leave open, and then the aft part of the canopy. And as you can see, there's a frame, right? It's not just a solid glass piece like you might see on a modern F-16 or something like that, where it's just a bubble canopy, or even on some World War II aircraft. Her was pretty much just a bubble canopy that slid back. In this particular case, there was a frame for the clear glass, or probably like another used acrylic plastics in some cases. But this can be done in a lot of different ways. You can try to hand paint the frame, and my hands are not steady enough for that, so it doesn't work for me usually. There's definitely some kits that I did as a kid that way. You can, by hand, try to cut and trim pieces of tape. I've done that before. There are also aftermarket things that you can buy, very similar to the seat belts that I got, that are made for a particular kit, and they are pre-cut masks for all of the clear parts. Or in Tamiya's case, they give you this sheet that had all of the little clear parts marked, but you had to cut them out. Now I vastly prefer the pre-cut seals rather than having to cut them myself. But in this case, this came with the kit. If it didn't have this, I probably would have bought one of the pre-cut kits just so that I didn't have to try to create these masks myself, because you can see some of the curves are kind of complex. The squared off ones actually have round corners. Those wouldn't have been too bad, even if I just left them square. In this scale, you wouldn't really notice, but some of these things would have been difficult to get the shape quite right by just cutting tape. So I'm glad I had this. So I had to cut out each one of these shapes and apply them to the canopy. Hopefully you can kind of still see them there. If I can see maybe a difference in the texture. I applied them to the canopy, and then what you want to do first, at least in the case of the Japanese builds, you spray it black, because that's what you'll see from the inside. Now the inside is just a piece of tape that I used to keep the inside clean. Once I peel all of this off, what you would see on the inside is black, while the outside will be the body color. So I sprayed that yesterday and got all 3 canopy pieces masked up, and basically what amounts to the priming coat applied to the kit. So quite a bit was done between last stream and this, as you can see. The reason I did it off stream again was because there was a lot of hurry up and wait kind of stuff, where I had to paint something and then wait for it to dry, and then paint something and then wait for it to dry, or assemble something and wait for it to dry and then paint it. Or while it might have been interesting to watch me cut a few of these squares out on the various shapes to get this masked off, I suspect that nobody wants to sit there and watch me cut tape for an hour. So that was why I chose to do some of these things off stream, because what I can do today now is show you some masking, because we need to now protect the underside of the airframe, as well as this camouflage line that we want to. Well, camouflage may not be the right word, since it's not really a camo pattern, but it kind of is, light on the bottom and dark on the top. But anyway, we want to protect this line, so we'll be taping the sides of the fuselage to get this nice curve like that, so that we can then proceed to paint the upper color. So that's what we'll start with today. Hopefully that doesn't take too long, and we can move on to the actual painting. And in that case, what we'll paint is the green for the top, and we'll do that for the top of the fuselage and the wings, as well as for the canopy components as well. That's probably all we'll be able to do today. One of the things I'll probably follow up off stream on that is the blue color that would be here, as well as on the insides of the wheel well covers and all those kinds of components that would be fitting into here, because there's not a whole lot to that. We may actually end up getting to that today. I'm not sure. Probably not. I'll be thinking about that as we go today. But at the very least, hopefully we'll have the top color taken care of. Then it'll be a little while before my next stream, because once we get the top color on, we got to let it dry really well, and then we got to provide a gloss coat to that, get a really smooth, shiny surface, and that takes 24 hours to dry. And then we can stream actually applying all of the decals to the kit. Then we have to let those dry, gloss it again, and then put a semi-gloss coat probably on it. I like mine not to be completely flat, but we'll see. And then we can do some weathering on the stream. So there'll be a bit of gaps between some of my streams for the next little bit. So hopefully you'll forgive me for that. You may also notice that I kind of rigged up some struts for it so that I could actually set it down when I was done painting it. I did that for the primer coat, but then also when I was painting the underside, because then I can just set it down, because this was wet paint and this was wet paint, so I wanted to make sure that I could actually set it down somewhere and actually protect the work that I had done. So we'll use those again, and we have to move them off a little bit to tape and then cut the hole and then reinsert them as well. Although we don't necessarily need them so much, because ultimately we could just set it down once we're done painting it. But it does kind of give me something to hold on to here and there to give myself a little bit more stability when we are painting the top surface. So that's where we'll go today. So it'll be a lot of tape work, and then I think maybe the most interesting part will be this curve that I have to tape off, and I'll talk about how I judge that curve on each side and how we go about that. I do want to apologize in advance. I'm kind of expecting a phone call. I might have to pause for a few minutes for that if that comes through. But otherwise, we'll just press through and hopefully get this done within a couple hours or so. I don't think it'll take more than a couple hours, but often I'm a poor judge of this, so we'll see how that goes. Excuse me. So, what we're following is, if you remember, there's actually a couple different paint schemes we could have chosen. I chose to go with this particular 302nd Naval Fighter Group pattern. So this is what we will be doing. It makes it a little bit more complicated. The other schemes, one of the other schemes did have a nice flat line that we could have used, but we didn't build a Mitsubishi. We built a Nakajima, and those tend to have these swooping camo lines, at least out of the factory. But before we get to the complex, we start with the simple, and we just need to make sure that the underside is nice and protected. Now, some people won't bother with the whole underside. Ideally, we might not have to pick it up much because we don't need to get to the underside as we're painting. We only need to paint the top surface. So it could be that I don't actually have to handle it much and such that I wouldn't necessarily have to mask, say, the middle of the wing or the middle of the fuselage here. I tend to err on the side of caution because I've been burned a few times by assuming that I'm not going to get any underspray, and then I do. So I tend to over-apply tape because tape is cheap, and I prefer to save my time. So what we'll do, we'll remove those struts for the time being. What we have is basically it's just Tamiya masking tape. Let's see, I think I have it unopened. No, I do not. It's just like masking tape, but it's designed to be used for models. It can be quite sticky. In fact, sometimes too sticky. So with fresh paint, sometimes I will, with fresher paint, this has been drying for over 24 hours now, I'll actually put it on my palm and kind of remove some of the adhesive with it. But I'm not going to have to worry about that too much today. So what we'll do is just start applying some tape in nice strips. I'm going to give myself a nice favor here and go ahead and nicely tape off those flaps because again later this will be that interior blue, so there's no point in me covering that right now because it's already going to be a different color. It doesn't matter if I get a little bit of the surface green on there or not. It will be coming a different color anyway, so I might as well start kind of preemptively taping that off so that later I don't have to worry about removing tape and adding more or cutting tape or anything like that is just already there. So we just line it up with the edge there. Nothing really fancy about that, just getting those edges nice and covered. Again, I'm probably overkilling this because it's unlikely that that particular part of the wing would see much paint, but I prefer to err on the side of caution than on the side of sadness. Because let me tell you, having accidentally sprayed too much at an angle, there would be sadness because I would have to then figure out how to go from there. So the dark color, looking at the instructions here, actually wraps a little bit around the underside of the wing. So I don't need to go to like the actual divide between the wings. I have a bit of wraparound there, so it actually should come a little bit to the underside. So that means I don't have to go quite so meticulously to the edge because we actually want some of that top green to wrap around it. And indeed, in the front of the wing, that will ultimately be covered by a decal. So we don't have to worry about that too much. I'm hoping that honking that one of my neighbors is doing is not coming through on my stream, but it is quite annoying. Gotta love having neighbors, right? Unless you live out in the middle of nowhere, it's not something you can get away without, I guess. So you see, now we have this this nice line. All of it will be covered by the decal, but we do want a little bit of that that green to wrap around. I may be doing it a little too much. But not overly concerned with it there. This is indeed a hobby and for fun, not for the Smithsonian archives or anything. So we just kind of continue doing that, trying to keep the line going nice and continuously. So that it's consistent across the space. I'm going to actually cut this by hand a little bit at the edge because it was getting a little too close. But will let me try not to damage the underlying paint. That would also be a road to sadness. So hopefully you can see, if I move my hand, we now have just this little bit of lip of, that will stay green along those front edges. And I kind of stopped where I did because it's starting to kind of curve there. So we'll get to how to handle that curve in a minute. I used to try not to use so much tape. But I've just decided that it's worth spending the money on a little bit more tape than it is spending the time on going back and fixing the problem. And it comes in a variety of widths. So right now I'm using a thicker width tape. I have a thinner width tape we will also use some of. I do have to be a little bit cautious about this because I don't have much of this left. I need to order some more. And then I also order a very, very thin tape that's meant to be used to do curves. And I'll show you how I do that instead of buying the tape, because the curved tape is a little bit overpriced in my opinion. So we don't have that here today. So we got the easy part done. The rear of the wings, at least going off of what's shown in the instructions, don't have that same wrapped around green. So we'll have to adjust for that. So I want a nice clean edge. So one of the unfortunate things about this tape dispenser is it does not, it has to cut it, so it gives this little jagged edge, right? Can't see because I'm off camera. It has to cut it, so it has a jagged edge there. And it cuts, as you might expect, a jagged edge. So the next piece of tape that I want to put down is going to be on this edge here. And then what I want to try to do is to kind of hold that wing down to the surface and then cut along the edge, like this, to get that tape nice and clean on that edge. So we'll have the tape extended a little bit, but then cut off the excess. So we don't want tape hanging over the edge because that's a good way to allow paint to bleed under the tape. So we want it to have a nice and clean line there. So we'll start with as little hanging over as possible, but since that edge that we're also trying to save for later is not at a 90 to the wing, slow and also the wing edge curves, you'll see eventually as it goes, we end up having more and more tape that hangs off the edge there. So we'll get that down nice and tight to the edge, and then we come back to the top side and we remove that tape. So I'm holding the wing down. Sorry, this is probably going to be difficult to see since I'm right-handed and I forgot to put the camera on the other side again. One of these days I'll remember. The day is not today. And then carefully but firmly just draw the X-Acto knife along the edge of the wing. Holding my breath so I don't screw up. That's how that works. There we go. Just a little sliver that we want to cut off there. And the same on the other side of that little stuck out component. Again, not in the best camera angle, sorry. I'll show you in just a second. And there we go. So that worked out really well. We used the top of the wing edge to trim off the excess tape. So now we have this very nice, clean curve to cover the edge. Worked really nicely. One thing that we need to come back and do though is you see that there's this little, maybe you don't see, but there's a little line there where we do want that green as on the front to continue into the underside just a little bit. And that one piece of tape that we used did go a little too far. So we can use the seam that is there, because that's the join between the lower half of the wing and the upper half, to guide us in cutting off that tape. I think what I ended up doing is actually just shoving it down in that gap. Not exactly what I wanted to do. But it will work for the moment. It did cut it, so I was able to pull it out of the gap there that we still want to keep but we want to be able to paint correctly. So there's one wing edge, nice and neat. We'll be able to do the same to the front to some extent, although we still also have that angle that we need, but we'll be able to get most of the extra tape off. I do like to keep, when I cut large portions of tape off like that, I kind of keep them in case I need some small piece of tape. I don't have to come back and cut off a large piece of tape from my roll. I just use the leftovers from a previous cut. And if you guys have any questions about what I'm doing, please feel free to chime in. Happy to answer questions. That's kind of the whole point of this, other than just to encourage me to continue working on this. Excuse me. So let's finish that wing. We'll get another piece of tape. Doesn't need to be a long one. We just have a very short stretch here. This one's going to be a little bit more complicated. Actually, I need to think about this for a second because we don't want the wing. We don't want that just to be straight, right? We want to follow the edge of the wing around. So what we'll do is we'll stick the tape on there. I'm going to try something. I don't know if this is going to work. We'll try it. I've stuck the tape on there a little further forward than I actually would have wanted. Actually, I'm going to push that a little further back. Not much, but just a little further back. And I'm going to do what I did on the other side. I'm going to follow it around with the X-Acto knife and cut off the curve there. A little harder on this edge because it doesn't sit as flat as it did on the other side, but I think that worked out. So now we have it covered, but we don't want it covered all the way to the edge like that. So what we're going to do, and we'll see if this worked right, we want to peel that piece off. But now it's in the shape of that edge. If I can get it off without pulling what I already put down off. There we go. So now we have the tape in the shape of that corner. And what I want is to lay that tape down so that it follows that edge. At least mostly. Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, this isn't going to a museum somewhere. I just want the general idea to be right. Just need to get the right angle. So I think it's going to work, but I'm going to have to maneuver it back and forth a little bit so I get it exactly where I want it. The good news is we don't really need the tape super sticky. We just need it sticky enough to prevent the paint from going where we don't want it. I think, friends, that we have done it. So look at there. So we use the edge of the wing to as a template, and we were able to then follow the edge nicely with that tape. So there's a little bit of uncovered area down here that we still need to cover. So I will take some tape that I had used previously for another component, place that down nice and firmly. I'll use the edge again, I'll remove most of it. And then we'll come back in and clean up that edge that we actually want to keep. We've now recovered it a little bit. So this is a lot of what more advanced masking is. It's kind of figuring out what you can do to cover what you don't want painted. Sometimes that's easier than others. In this case, it worked out pretty well. So hopefully, when we repeat this on the other side, we have a similar result. One result doesn't necessarily guarantee the other. So I'm kind of having to tear at the tape here a little bit. Didn't quite cut the way I wanted it to. There we go. Alright, so that's one wing half. I still need to come and cover the front of the engine cowling a little bit better, but we'll come back to that in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and do the same technique on the other wing. Clean up some of my mess here with this tank detritus. So as before, we'll start on the flaps side. Got to be careful of the pitot tube here. We don't want to break it off. That would be another sad thing. It's another part that you can actually buy. It would come in their detail up set if you wanted to. There's a nice metal tube there. It's much more realistic in scale, thickness. But I chose not to for this particular kit. Alright, so again we cut that line straight so that we can follow this edge very nicely without that jaggy cut that the dispenser provides us. Trying to get right on the edge. both of the wing and of that flap opening to minimize how much tape I have to cut off. Push that down really well. And then use that edge again as a template. We don't need to get all the tape off. Just trying to get as much of it off as we can. Again, so it doesn't encourage paint to seep under. So if we had this large flap of tape sticking out, it would be a good way for paint to seep under it. It's not a perfect seal. It's good enough for purpose, but not perfect. So we don't want to rely on that and then pull the tape off later, only to find that we now have to do some touch-up painting. And you almost always have to do some touch-up painting. I just did exactly what I hoped I wouldn't do. There would be an advantage of the metal tube. I'm likely to bonk it and bend it. To be honest, I should have put that on later. I was hoping that the paint would give it extra strength. Instead, what I've done is bend it. So I may actually end up having to cut that off and put it back later. So I just had to straighten out the pit toe tube because I just was a dummy. This side's going to be a little harder for that very reason. To do what we want to do here, we'll give it a try much more carefully. Now that I realize that it's very easy to be a dummy here. So again, just using that edge as a template. I will carefully remove that tape. And try to appropriately position it. And that's going to work pretty well. There's a little bit of a tail that we need to cut off over here. And that does that. So there's the majority of the wings taken care of. I'm going to do one long strip towards the tail. Then I'll come back and worry about the and decaling. A lot of prep work for this, but it pays off in the long run, to be sure. So, one of the things that I painted yesterday is a part that the engine housing will sit on there like this. And I painted a part yesterday. There. But actually, how'd that go on? Oh, I need to know what's going on there as well. So this will go on like so. A little further on, but I'm not going to snap it in place right now. And then this will actually sit on top of that, like so. And so. Saying and so, hold on. We'll actually have this sitting under there, like that. So I need to bring the tape up a little bit so that it matches with that line. So that when all is said and done, we have the engine nacelle on there, engine cowling. I keep calling it a nacelle, it's not a nacelle. The engine cowling on there. And this air scoop that the color lines up correctly. So, also looking at the instructions, you can kind of see that it kind of comes out of the wing root a little there. And then it also has this straight line here. So what we want then is basically for this little spot here to come out and over and down. So I have a nice tool to help with this. What we're going to want to probably do is cut, I think, what we're going to want to do is cut a piece of tape to the right length. Basically a pair of calipers, or compass needles, if you will, that I can use to measure how wide I want this to be. I can go from wing root to wing root about the same place as we would get from this component. So that we can make sure that that is the right size. And we can see if we put that back down here, it lines up about with where the instructions suggest that should be. So we'll want a piece of tape that's about that long. keep pumping, this is where it's going to be the end of me. So we just need a short piece of tape. We'll want it clean on both sides. So I like to put the tape down. I've got this grid on my mat, and it does have these inch markers that I can use to cut a nice straight line. Like that. And then now I can use, oh, sorry, I'm off camera. Thought I'd set this up a little bit better, but now I can use it to cut the tape. And we end up with a piece of tape that is as wide as we want it to be, with nice clean edges. So then we can now add that down here. Not straight. And hopefully when we add our part, the tape will line up pretty closely. We need to come back with just a minor bit of paint of one color or the other on the brush. It's not the end of the world. So there we have the wing and the forward part of the fuselage mask off. Need to finish the rear, and then we need to mask the top, and we're ready for paint. So the good news is the underside of the tail stabilizers have the same problem. We have the same, maybe difficult to see, line that follows the inside of the tail surfaces. And unfortunately, we also don't have a good way to lay those flat. So this will be a bit of a challenge. So we'll do the tail surfaces. We'll finish off this space, and then we'll work up the swoop on the side before going to the top. So the rear part of the tail is pretty easy. Just as far as not needing to get some of the green top color on its underside. Get that done on both sides. for the front, I'll try is to follow that edge not quite on. So we have a little bit of a lip there. And then see if I can lift this tape just a little bit and cut it without marring the paint below it. Actually, I have a better idea. I think I should have done this in the reverse order, but anyway. I'm going to peel the tape that I want to keep up a little bit, put some sacrificial tape down. That way if I press a little too hard, I shouldn't damage the paint below it. I still want just to cut through this one layer of tape. I'm definitely making this harder on myself than I need to. But that did work. At least that far. I'm overcomplicating this. I'm going to start over. I am overcomplicating this. We will do what we did before. And by before I mean on the front wings, the main wings. Piece of tape is way too long. And we are going to follow that edge. Hopefully without stabbing ourselves. And hopefully without ruining our good paint. That's finger. That's a finger. Well, it tore exactly in a way we didn't want it to. Ah, darn. Darn, darn, darn. All right. Option the second. Third? Third, I guess. So instead of tracing the wing by using the wing, we actually traced the wing onto the tape, cut the shape, and hopefully and there we go. So, like I said, started out by making it way harder than it needed to be. But sometimes you live and learn. So, we will definitely do that on the other side because that was way easier. I'm going to try a different pencil though because that pencil lead did not transfer very well. I think I have a softer pencil lead. Is this softer? Yeah, that's better. So sometimes you gotta try a few times before you get where you want to get. But that's part of the fun, kind of learning different ways to do things. Let's see how that does. So hopefully this is interesting. I did say it would take a while, and it has. I think we're going to call that close enough for government work. There's one side. I'm going to have to add a little bit of a curve there to get it exactly where I need it to be, but What I mean is, you see where I left a little gap there, that needs to come around a little bit more before it reaches the flap, and that's where the color goes all the way to the end. So I'll have to add a little bit there. That's where some of our scraps will come in. It's easy to do a facsimile of a curve by using small pieces, and we'll see that a bit more in a second. Doesn't matter that it's actually straight, the eye will make it look like it's curving there like we want it to. At least enough for our purposes. Use some of our leftover from the previous cut. Cover that gap. And there we go. Sorry, that was probably loud. So there's a couple things that we need to pay attention to now. The rear color slopes down. Actually, don't have this little tail piece on. I'll hand paint that later. It's a clear part, and the tail, very tip of it needs to stay clear. So I'll probably hand paint that later. But this slopes down from the edge of the wing, I should say from the tail stabilizer, down towards the tip of the tail. So we'll need to do that on both sides. The easiest way, if you don't have the thin Tamiya tape, is just to use tape you got, but in thin strips. So I just take a thin strip of the tape. I actually want it to be, sorry, Mindy just went outside with the pupper. Take that thin strip, actually make it a little thinner. It's easy. The thinner it is, the easier it is to curve. And then we will bend that again, like a dummy. It's going to come off before I'm done. I'm almost certain it's going to fall off. As long as it falls off, I don't know where it falls off. I can add it back later. Should not have put that on yet. So we start it where we want it to end, or where we want it to begin. Either way, it kind of works. Easier to do with fingers than with tweezers. So I'm going to start at the root of the tail stabilizer. And then just kind of shape it the way we want. Take some sticking and resticking and unsticking and kind of slowly shaping it the way we want. Didn't quite curve it enough, so I'm going to move back towards the beginning a little bit more. Start the curve sooner. Just a little bit extra space. I didn't quite go far enough. And there you go. So now with a straight piece of tape, we've created a curve. So we just make sure that that is nice and firmly pushed down along the edge that we care about. And we do the same thing on the other side. So since I cut that one strip in half, I have the same length for the other side. Starting at the wing root. Getting a little easier with fingers, I think. The door chime again, sorry. Probably should mute that when I'm streaming. And now we have another curve. And we look from the rear, they line up nicely. So we have that nice curve on either side. We have a puppy visitor.
You want that too?
Hold on, I'm going to mute because we're going to get some echo here. So that was puppy visitor, if you saw. So as we were saying, we have the curve on both halves. If you look from the rear, they line up pretty well. So we've got the shape that we need, and now we just fill in space that we want to keep that color. So we just do that with strips of tape, of course. Sorry about the rebroadcast of previous statements there. Nana's watching the stream. And then, of course, the stream is a little behind. And so when she came in, it was playing something I previously said. So we're just using small strips of tape to cover next to the curve so we don't lose what we just spent that time doing. So given what time it is, I think what I'm hoping to do here is finish the masking. And I'll probably go shove some food in my mouth real quick and then do the painting. So hopefully that is acceptable to everyone. Everyone being, I think, Cleary and Min at this point. Still got a bit of masking left to do though. Because this was the simple curve. Oh, you know why it's not sticking? Because I'm trying to stick the wrong side. It's surprising to know when the back side of tape and single-sided tape is not sticky. Oops. Just trying to finish that curve in the rear. So at the end of the day, we have a nice clean curve at the back. And now just kind of making sure the tail space is all nice and covered. The tail wheel will go. And I think that wraps the tail, both literally and figuratively. So that brings us to the complex curve. We now need to go from the wing root up to the tail plane. So that's what we'll try to do next. Ideally, there's a lot of scraps here to get rid of. We'll do that in one long swoop to give us a clean edge. So what I'm going to do, clean some of this junk up. And use one long piece of tape. About that long will do it. We're just a little over the 2-inch mark. So, again, we cut just a real thin strip. You can see they're pretty thin. And this is one of the less complex slopes. It's just kind of, it doesn't have any sort of S shape to it. It's just a slow slope up. And we want, you can kind of use some panel lines as guiding points. So we can see that this little panel line here, we haven't quite made it up to the horizontal component. So we can use that as a marker as we make our path up. So you kind of have to use landmarks like that if you want to mimic it. So here is that panel line. So we know that we don't want to be quite that high yet when we cross that point. So it gives us a nice reference to work with. We also want to be careful not to cut off too much of our leading edge there that we worked so hard to trace off. And there we go. Make sure that's nice and firm. And that covers our curve. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. I don't know if you can hear Min talking to our puppy. We got her just a few days ago. So the training is still ongoing, both of her and of us. She slept really well the first night. The second night she whined for a bit. So interestingly, we don't have the same, so we may have already gotten the beginning of our curve taken care of. Which is nice. I did the shape wrong. That should do. Now we fill in the gaps. So you may notice that I came up pretty high with that underside color because I wasn't sure how high the demarcation line sat. So it's a little higher than it needed to be, but that's okay. It'll paint over just fine. So you may think, aha, we're almost done. And that's true, we're getting close. We have a couple more things we got to take care of though. We still have the remainder of the wing root. And then of course the top surfaces. Let me check something real quick. Okay. I wanted to make sure that this edge here was also supposed to be that blue, all the way to the edge. And it is, so. What we can do we still need to get this curve. But we also want to map the edge of mask the edge of that flap that we will paint later. And then we will carefully trace that edge. Not a whole lot of room for fingers in there. So the painting should actually go pretty quick. It's the masking that always takes the longest, because you gotta get everything just so. If you mess it up, well, in some cases you're starting over. So better to take the time at the front to give you this nice clean underside. So we have the leading edge that still shows like it should. We've got the underside of the engine housing, engine cowl covered. We have the leading edge of the tail stabilizers done, and we have the slope of that component of the fuselage painting as well. What remains is up here. I'm going back and looking at the instructions for the coloring. These rails that I painted green actually don't need to stay green, so I don't have to worry about masking them off nicely. I just have to worry about masking off the rear. I also overpainted the black in front a little bit. We don't have to worry about that too much because the windscreen will sit on top of that. But it is nice to know that we don't have to worry about it to be too exact. So we'll start maybe with the front, and then I might end up actually using something different for the rear. Let me think about that for a second while we mask off this front part here. Now, there's a couple reasons why I don't have to worry about this being too exact. Again, part of it's going to be covered by the base of the windscreen, but also because flat black is, or semi-gloss black in this case, extremely easy to touch up. So not overly concerned with it. In fact, I had already previously intentionally covered something that should have been black to make masking the interior a little easier. That I'll come back later and paint. So the front is easy as that. Actually, one little strip. Oh, it didn't cut. Just a little bit more coverage on this side. Mostly for the interior protection. I'm likely going to have to do some touch up of the interior anyway, but not too bad. Okay. I think I might use a combination of techniques here. So, let me think about it as we do this. So at its narrowest, you would need a strip of tape about like that. So now we're masking off this interior green part. Like I said, the rails themselves need to be the exterior color, not the interior green. So I'm trying to line up the edge of this tape with that rail. Like that. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Watch this line stand up. Yes, I know I've been on my butt for quite some time. I'm busy, yo. Ultimately, there will be a headrest mounted to this vertical component. I have not cut that or painted it yet. That surface does need to be this green. There's a lot of angles that I'm trying to protect here, so I'm using a lot of overlapping tape for that purpose. Looks a little chaotic, I'm sure, but that's why. So hopefully that covers everything we need covered for the front. But I see a little gap already, actually. Utilizing those scraps that I've got left to wrap that up. But I thought I might use some putty that I use, some masking putty. But I think I'm just going to use some more tape. A lot of this is going to be covered by the frame of the canopy anyway, but it's sometimes difficult to tell how much of that is going to be covered. So you would have thought I planned the length of that, because it looks like it's going to work out just about perfectly, but I just got lucky. Wow. If I had tried to plan that, it wouldn't have worked that well. Okay, so we've completed masking. I think what I'm going to do is, as I suggested, is take a short intermission to feed my belly and move the camera and such. You know what? I'm just going to take this thing off. This would be silver anyway. The pitot tube. I will just save it for later. Okay, so as I was saying, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna be right back up. Let's shove a couple pieces of pizza in my mouth, move the camera, move everything I need over to paint, get ready for that, and then we'll airbrush. Again, I'll explain the airbrush, but then I'll mute because it's very loud. But we'll be back, say, in about 5 to 10 minutes. So, hang on. Okay, we're back. So thanks for hanging around for a minute while I stuffed my face with some pizza. So I appreciate you hanging around for just a minute while I did that, because this stream has taken longer than I thought it would. But that's normal. So as you can see, we've got some stuff over here on the side that I'm actually going to remove from the airbrush booth. There were other components that were the same color as the underside of the fuselage, but we don't need those now. Some of those we will come back and paint later. The kind of metallic blue-green. Hi, Emmy. To do that later, but we have things like the drop tank and the wheel well covers and everything painted their exterior colors, not their interior colors yet. So, so we're back over here at the airbrush booth. We've got the Zero all masked up, which is what we spent the first hour and a half of the stream doing. So the first 30 minutes of me was talking about what I was going to do, and then the next hour and a half or so of me actually doing it. So we've got the underside painted the right color, but then masked it off so we can paint the top. We also have the canopy with its base coat of black, so that on the inside, when the tape is removed, you'll see the black frame. That would be kind of an anti-glare. And we can go from there. So we use, for this, we're going to use Japanese navy green for the top color. So hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm just kind of yell at you from my modeling desk because I mixed this up. So I thought I would go ahead and do all of this and then turn the camera back on, but I thought I'd talk through it again for people who hadn't seen it. Sorry, I've also got the sniffles now all of a sudden. So we have the Japanese green that we'll use, the navy green. Because our army green was a different color. When I use Tamiya paints, I use Tamiya thinner. It's probably not surprising. It is in shadow. Sorry about that. One of the things I need to do is get better lighting for my airbrush booth, that's for sure. So I will use Tamiya thinner for the Tamiya paint. It's about a 1-to-1 that you do for that, so that it's nice and well mixed. And then I also get all of my various cleaning agents prepared so that once I'm done, I can quickly disassemble and clean the airbrush. I actually need to go grab a couple of Q-tips, so pardon me for just a second. All right, back in the room. Sorry about that. I used all my Q-tips that I use for cleaning. Last time I did some airbrushing and forgot to refill that before starting my stream again. So when I clean my airbrush, I have a variety of brushes, everything from just Q-tips to these little micro brushes that I use to really get in all the nooks and crannies of the airbrush cleaning. And I'll show that when I get to that stage. So we have our paint mixed, we have our thinner. I'll go ahead and talk through getting the paint ready to go, but then I'll mute the stream when I'm actually airbrushing because it's quite loud. And I value your eardrums. So, without kicking the camera, sorry about that. Still getting used to this streaming thing. So I like to start with components that are less complex, so I'll probably actually start, or less important, I guess, easier to fix if I screw up. So actually I will start painting with the canopy hood rather than on the plane itself. So the way this works, I have my Iwata airbrush, and it's gravity fed. It has this little four leaf front end on it. I always take that off. I find that it clogs pretty easily. It's supposed to help you control the spray, but on anything that you end up spraying a lot of, any color you end up spraying a lot of, it seems to actually add a good chance of getting like splatter, and we certainly don't want that. And I have this that we can put this in here like this. I use this to spray out any extra paint, and then when I put cleaner in, I can spray it through to get a lot of the paint out. It collects in here, and then this is filtered so that it doesn't recirculate in the air, which is not good for me, it's not good for my family, so we have that taken care of. This whole hood actually has a filtration system. It sucks air in through the grate and out through a filter in the back. So that's one of the things that causes a lot of noise here, as well as the air compressor that I use to actually do the painting. So I previously stirred the paint just with a paint stick. I'm going to be painting a lot. There's a large surface area that I need to cover with the plane's body. So I'll end up loading this up pretty heavily. It doesn't take a whole lot of paint, so I'll probably end up overloading it even more. I know that. I just have a little glass eyedropper. You can use plastic ones as well. Some people even just pour it, but I find that just makes a big mess, so I don't do that. So we just get started by adding a good bit of paint to the airbrush cup. Now the nice thing is here, I'm not mixing colors, so if it turns out I didn't add enough paint, I can come back and add more pretty easily. The problem comes when you have to mix colors to make the desired color you want. You want to overdo it, because if you have to come back and add more paint, you might not add the right mixture of colors, and that would be bad. So now we have the paint in the cup. Excuse me. We want to add a thinner. Tamiya paint and most paints need to be thinned before they can be used through an airbrush, at least. We could certainly hand paint with this, but we wouldn't be able to airbrush with this. So it's about a 2 to 1, or I'm sorry, a 1 to 1. But what you really want is, once you've got the thinner in there, you kind of mix it with the paint, and you get this almost milky consistency to it. You don't want it too thin, because then it's not going to coat, but you don't want it too thick, because then it's not likely to actually come out of your airbrush cleanly. So add a little bit more thinner. Mix that up real good, real well. Good English there, sorry to me. And that's now got the consistency running that I want. So what you'll see me do, I'll go on mute here in a second, but what you'll see me do is I'll test it first on this note card. I'll also test it on this piece of just plastic from an old kit, just to make sure it's lined down the way I want it to. And then I'll start with the canopy glass frame, and assuming all things go well, I'll move on to the body of the plane itself. Then I'll flush, once that's done, I'll flush it with isopropyl alcohol, because I still need the compressor for that. But then I'll turn off all the noisemakers and come back and explain the disassembly process and the cleaning process from that point. So at this point, I ask that you wish me luck, because while I've done this quite a few times, I'm still not extremely confident in it. But hopefully we've got this set up well. I'll put on my very attractive respirator so I don't breathe this in, even though this is filtered. Some particles still become loose in the air. So now this is what I sound like with this nice respirator on. And we're going to go, I assume that means good luck. I'm going to mute myself now so that the noise isn't too loud. So I'll be back with you hopefully in a few minutes. All right. So that went really well. Really pleased with how that green came out. I'm not going to handle it just yet, although it's practically dry to the touch now. One of the nice things about airbrushing is it puts on a very light coat, so I could probably handle it by the paint now and not do any damage to it as long as I didn't put a whole lot of pressure on it. But I thought I'd unmute for a minute to talk about the cleaning of the airbrush itself. So you saw that I ran quite a bit of isopropyl alcohol through it to get probably 99% of the paint out. It takes care of almost all of it. And then I ran just a little bit of distilled water through it as well. But that doesn't get all of it out because there are a lot of nooks and crannies of this. So these Iwata airbrushes, and indeed a lot of airbrushes like this, you can completely disassemble. So there's this retaining nut at the back that comes off, and you can remove the needle. And this is the most delicate part of any airbrush because that tip is extremely fine. And if you bend that, which I've done on a different tip, you basically ruined the needle, and you have to get another one. Sometimes you can file them back into shape, but more often than not, you're spending another $40 on a new needle. So it disassembles pretty easily. So I like to completely disassemble mine, and then I just go back with my yes, it is a green plane now. Imperial Navy green. It won't stay this pristine. I will do some weathering to it. But this is the color it should be. So I just come back with my various brushes, Q-tips and micro brushes and whatnot, and really scour the brush. I probably overdo it, to be honest, but I would rather not come back later and be trying to put down a yellow or a red or something and it turns out to be tinted green because I didn't completely clear out the previous paint color. So some brands of paint, even some colors within the same brand, are harder or easier to clean. But I just go over all the surfaces I can, trying to pick up as much paint as I can to get as much paint off as possible so that the next time what little bit may still be in there isn't causing a problem. So Emmy, what I was talking about is the needle for the airbrush. Its tip is very fine and very delicate, such that if you drop it or bend it, you've pretty much ruined the needle. So there are a couple of ways that I try to minimize the likelihood of that getting damaged. One, I try not to drop it. Haha, right? The second thing you may have noticed was when I was pulling the needle out of the airbrush body, instead of pushing it forward or trying to remove the front nozzles off first, I removed that retaining nut and then pulled the needle out from the back. So that way I'm not putting any pressure on that fine tip. So that's kind of part number one. When I reassemble it, I'll actually go in the opposite direction and I'll show that. Just to try to minimize any possibility of accidentally bending that needle. The way I bent it was, unfortunately, as I was reassembling it, I activated my Butterfingers button and dropped my airbrush. And it ended up bending the needle and actually bent these tines in the back. I had to bend those back into shape, and that was pretty easy. I tried fixing the airbrush needle itself by bending it back into place and filing it down a little bit to try to get a nice fine tip, and it just was never the same. It worked, but I could not get a fine spray out of it. And with a nice airbrush like this, I can't, but somebody who's really good at it could basically write their name with it. I mean, just with a really fine fine line. I'm not that confident with my airbrushing, but if you have that bend at the tip of your needle where most of the control of the flow is taking place, well, then you've now just removed the ability to have that really fine detail. So I'm not really doing it on camera, but I'm just using these brushes to clean the inside and outsides of these components. And then when I go to clean the needle, because there's still paint on the needle, you can do it a couple of different ways. You could get some alcohol on your fingers and just rub the needle to make it clean. I like to kind of dip mine in the bottle, being very careful about the tip, so that I have a bead of isopropyl alcohol on there, and then I just roll it between my fingers to try to get all that residual paint off. Always moving towards the sharp point, because it is a very sharp point and it will impale your finger. Ask me how I know, and I'll cut to the chase because I've impaled my finger. Yes, you really want to be careful about cleaning and thorough about cleaning. Now, if you have several colors that you need to paint back to back, you can skip the disassembly step. You can run the first color through and then run some isopropyl alcohol through, maybe while it's assembled, trying to get down into the brush cup to remove any of the extra paint. I'll show you what I mean in a second. And then put the next color in. It's unlikely that you're going to get a whole lot of cross-contamination that way, so you can do that if you're trying to paint several different colors. So for instance, when I painted the interior green that's under the tape right now, and the flat black that's at the front, and then the underside body color, I didn't actually clean my brush between every single paint color. It just wasn't necessary. So reassembly, I have the airbrush body protecting the tip of the needle. I basically go in reverse. So I put the blunt end into the airbrush, and then as soon as I can, I pull it from the back. That's the opposite direction I went earlier. Earlier, I pulled from the back to bring the needle out to protect that tip. This time, instead, again, to protect the tip, I go in from the front, and I pull the needle back far enough that it may be difficult to see, but it's actually, I'm not going to get a good angle on this. The needle's actually in the cup, so it's not, the point of the needle is not at the front, because the reassembly, I've got to get these pieces back in here, and I don't want to, if I possibly slightly misalign it, run the risk of bending that tip. So I get the two front components on. For my particular brush, it does come apart into two pieces. So I reassemble those, and then I push the needle forward very gently. We don't want a lot of force until I see it just peek through the front, and you won't probably see this on camera, but it just peeked through, and I just kind of tap on the back real lightly just to make sure it's nicely seated, and then I come back with that retaining nut to squeeze down on those flanges, because what that does now is when I pull the trigger of this, that's what allows you to move the needle back and forth to control the amount of paint that comes out of the airbrush. The last thing that I do is I pull that needle point back by pulling the trigger back. I replace that 4-leaf cover on the front. While some people will use this to paint, I mainly use it just to protect that needle because it is sticking out just a little bit. So that way it doesn't get caught on anything. It does also come with this cover that you can use. It's not completely covered, but it does keep maybe some sloshing if you filled this up too much. It turns out that I filled it up almost perfectly. I had a little bit of paint left, but almost exactly what I needed. And that's that, guys. That's how you do some airbrushing and clean the brush afterwards. I think what I'm actually going to do next, I'm really curious to see how well my masking worked. So I need to protect the masking here because that's going to be a different color. I don't want to remove all the wing masking yet. But I do kind of want to see how well the masking worked around the tail. So I might go ahead and do that, because I'm going to have to do some remasking anyway. So I'm going to put the Be Right Back screen up for just a minute so that I don't make everybody seasick by moving my camera back over to my modeling desk. And we'll pull that tape off together and see how well it works. So if you'll hang with me for just a minute, I'm going to move this over there. Okay, so we're back. Back at the modeling desk itself. So in the better light, I can kind of see that there's some spots that didn't quite get as dark, and I'm okay with that because in the real thing, this would not be a solid color. In fact, one of the things I'll probably do later is come back with some oil paints and do an oil wash so that some areas will be lighter, some areas will be darker, because right now it looks kind of toy-like. It's all the same color, it's all almost the same consistency, and that's obviously not very realistic. So ultimately what I'll do is I'll come back with got a variety of oil colors that you just kind of dot along the paint and brush that down, and it'll give us a nice gradation, very subtle gradation that we'll do later. But that's going to be way later, and I will show that if I decide to do it, because first we've got to get a gloss coat on this, and then get the decals on this, and then get another gloss coat on it, and then the oils, and then a flat coat. So quite a bit left to do there. But I'm going to try to satisfy my curiosity here and see how well my masking worked. I'm going to leave the masking on around the cockpit because that doesn't need to come off just yet. Indeed, I'll leave that on until I'm ready to assemble the cockpit glass, and I'll pull some of the masks off of that as well. So again, I probably can handle it by what I just painted, but I'm going to try my best just to hold it by that little nub. That's where the headrest will ultimately sit for the pilot. I don't want to touch this any more than I've got to. Realistically, I should probably wait a little longer, but I'm not the most patient person when it comes to seeing how well my paint worked. So I'm going to do my best to only touch at places that, if I do miss the paint a little bit, it's not going to matter that much. So for instance, I can touch the front because that's going to be covered by the nose cone, not the nose cone, but the engine cowling at the end of the assembly. So if you were here for the masking of this, there was a lot of meticulous masking that we went through to try to get all these contours right. we're hoping that our masking hold up. And it's looking like it did, at least so far. So see, we're having this nice smooth line. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for me. I was joking as I was doing this that it ain't perfect, but this is also not for the Smithsonian, so not greatly concerned with it being absolutely perfect. When I was doing this, when I was competing in doing this, I already spent an hour and a half doing this masking. I might have spent even more time than that had I been, you know what, I'm just going to have to remask that later, that's okay. Had I been doing this for competition purposes. I don't compete anymore because I kind of got to the point where I felt like I was building what I thought a judge would want rather than what I wanted. And then just the stress of getting to and from the show with your kit, worrying about it sitting on the table and being touched by child hands. It was too much for me, so I chose not to do that anymore. Yeah, a lot of Tamiya in this build. For one, it's a Tamiya kit, and that does make it a little easier because the callouts in the instructions are their colors. So they'll tell you X18, and you know X18 is Tamiya semi-gloss black. So it makes it a little easier because two different companies might not have the same paint coloring callouts. That came off nicely. So it's nice. It's nice to follow the color callouts of the manufacturer. Oh man, that's nice. Rather than having to try to figure it out later. In fact, this is even Tamiya tape. Yeah. So every model show actually has competitions. And you'll compete in categories. So this would fit in, say, World War II era single prop 148 scale fighter planes, and that's what that would be. So how do we do? That line looks really good to me on this side. So you see it's really clean. There's a little bit of a shadow there where the tape didn't quite stick down perfectly, but it's not so bad that I can't correct for that with some shading later. Not even on camera, sorry. But there's a little bit of lump there that didn't quite get taped off just right. But I can either correct that with just a little bit of touch-up paint or with the weathering that I do later. On the other side, unfortunately, we had that also happen about halfway down. Again, not too bad. That's something that I can cover up with a little bit of weathering or touch up later. I'll probably do a little touch up here with a darker green, but overall, really happy with the way that curve came out. It really kind of matches. I think the other side's a little bit better. Matches the curve that we were trying to duplicate from the instructions. So not bad at all. And then on the underside of the wings, we just have that leading edge underside green just like we wanted, right up to the wheel wells. Got a little bit of a shadow there that we don't want, but a lot of that's going to be covered by another part anyway, so it won't matter. Sorry, zoomed in a little too far. And then we have this nice clean line all the way around. This line is not unsurprisingly clean because this was one straight piece of tape, so not really a big surprise there. And then part of this was painted black earlier. It is now the correct green. A little bit of interior green that was still showing here is now the dark green. So very, very happy about that. I'm going to go set this back down in the airbrush hood. So before I handle it anymore, I'm going to let it dry very well. Next step there would be getting a gloss coat on it. And what I use for gloss is called All Clad. Oh, that's my mat. Where'd my gloss go? Here it is. So it's Aqua Clear Gloss. It actually looks kind of milky, but when it sprays down, it goes really flat, really clear. It's very nice. So we'll get a gloss coat on there. That has to dry for 24 hours. And then once that's nice and dry, we can get to the decal work. Once the decals are dry, then we can put another gloss coat down, do the oil coat. That has to dry for a couple of days. And then the final flat coat, and then some pencil weathering. Yeah, the competitions can be quite stressful. You build this thing, you put your heart into it. You got to transport it several hours in a lot of cases to the venue, get it on the table. You're worried about people touching it all the time. My dad actually had a kit broken by a judge who handled it poorly. And then you got to be worried about getting a judge who's an expert on all things Nakajima Zeros. And, this particular kit has 7 too many rivets on the left wing, and he really should have filled those in and sanded them down, so there's no way he can win. I mean, you run into people like that who really need more to do with their lives. So I don't bother with that anymore. It was fun for a while, but as I got older, it just became something I didn't want to deal with anymore. So one more thing I want to show. We did paint the Canopy Components, and if you weren't here earlier on, the way that worked is they're clear pieces. Tamiya provides a template that you can use for masking those off. These were not pre-cut. I much prefer the pre-cut ones. It's a lot simpler, but you cut these out and then you apply them to the Canopy Components. You put a black coat down first because that's what you'll see through the underside of the canopy, and then you put the surface color down. So I'm going to see if I can remove the masks without damaging the surrounding paint, and see how well we did there with those. So again, I realized last stream and then didn't do anything about it this time. I'm right-handed. I had my camera on the left side, so it makes it a little difficult for you to see what I'm doing. So I need to remember for my decaling stream to switch this around, because that's going to be a stream that's really important for you guys to see what it is I'm actually doing. Because it's going to be all small detail work, which means it'll be sitting here like this, and if the camera is on this side, you'll miss it. And we don't want that. So just pulling off the canopy masks, little sections now. Overall, pretty happy with it. So far. And there you go. So as I was talking about to begin with, as a kid I used to hand paint these. You can now buy aftermarket masks that are pre-cut and fit the shapes perfectly, or like Tamiya does, provides the template and you can cut them out and apply them. And if you do it correctly, then what you end up with is a very nicely painted frame like this, with minimal fuss. Oops. So I will have to come back and do a little bit of touch up, a little bit of scraping here and there with a toothpick, just to get a few of the spots that didn't quite get masked well taken care of. But for the most part, the forward part of the canopy came out really nicely. So we can hope that the rest did as well. Oh, and you can see, maybe, it's probably hard to tell, the inside is black because the first coat we put down was black. That would be for the pilot's benefit. And those model shows ended up being a lot of stress for not a whole lot. I mean, they were fun. At the end of the day, you went home with a trophy. Assuming you won. My brother actually competed at nationals as a junior, as a young, not an adult, I mean, in the juniors category, and actually won with his figure that he did that year. He is very, very good. He does a lot of hand painting for his figures. So think things like Warhammer 40K, the Star Wars board game, things like that is what he likes to do. Very, very good at it. My dad and I tend more towards non-figure work. So he sticks to almost exclusively, I should say, war subjects: World War I, World War II, Vietnam, some modern, but not much, say, in the automotive space or motorcycles or all the other types of things like that. Whereas I'll just build just about anything: ships, aircraft, tanks, cars, whatever seems to catch my eye that day. And a lot of times it's literally that. I'll finish this whenever I do, and I'll go back into the closet that has all my kits, and I'll just kind of stare for a while until I decide what I want to build next. That one came out pretty well too. And this last one was the one I was more worried about because it had some complex corners to it. Were a little bit more challenging to cut out. So I probably should have left these masks on the canopy, because I won't be using it for a while. I don't want it to get all dusty or scratched or anything. But I was just really curious to see how it came out. So what I'll do is cover it up with a cloth or back in the box or something so that it's protected both from dust and from the stray accidental touch with a sharp object. And then pull it back out when I need to. Yeah, that's understandable. I actually enjoy going back to my display cabinet and looking at what I've done. But one thing, it kind of shows my progress over the years. Yeah, that came out nice. Nice, nice, nice. Look at that. My father-in-law even said once, "So once you build them, what do you do with them?" I put them in a box and I look at them. One of my friends asked if I still flew them around, making plane sounds, through the air, and I will neither confirm nor deny whether or not I do that. We decided that needed to be from my my Only Planes. So it's a spin-off of OnlyFans, of course. So really happy with the way this came out. We got majority of the airbrushing done. Just went to grab the airframe again. Subbed my Only Planes. We got the majority of the airframe done. So we have the top IJN green, bottom IJN gray. I just popped that off and shouldn't have, but that's okay. It's something you don't want to do. Modeling tip: don't drop your model. I know it's surprising. Very happy with the way that came out. At the end of the day, we'll have this on the front like so. All the decals, of course, some weathering, landing gear, and all that. There will be some things that I'm going to do off stream before next time. So I need to remask and just paint these flaps here, because I'm going to display mine with the flaps down. And then in the interior there is this kind of blue-green metallic. Actually, is this I had to mix. So I'll paint that, as well as things like the insides of the landing gear wheel well covers and all the mechanisms that go in there that should be that same blue. I'll paint those. I'll give us a nice gloss coat on this, and the next thing will be, next thing I will stream is likely Decal Application. The most obvious, of course, being the meatballs. But we've got quite a few. So there's actually several models worth of decals here. A couple models worth, at least of the meatballs. So we'll put those on. We'll get the identifying the serial numbers. We'll get the yellow stripe for the front, the leading edge of the wings around the 20mm cannons, and there are a few other odds and ends that we also need to do as well. But that will have to come after a gloss coat, because we need a really smooth surface so that when we go to put the decals down, here's the other decals I was looking for. So we have a lot of little identifiers and labels and warnings and things like that I've got to put down. We want a really smooth surface so that no air builds up under the decal, because that would lead to silvering or clouding of that clear film. And it looks like crap, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. So we try to avoid it as much as possible. So that's why we gloss it, and then put the decals down, and then we gloss it again, to really try to seal in the flavor as it is. It's kind of an odd way to say it, sorry. But it is what it is now. So I hope you enjoyed what we showed. I mean, and maybe Kara, I'm not sure who House 414 is, who joined. I hope you enjoyed what you guys saw. To be the cliche streamer, if you haven't liked and followed, go ahead and toss me one. That'd be great. Doesn't mean I expect or will be distressed if you don't. attend my every stream. I know this is not something that interests everyone or that they want to spend a whole lot of time on, but if you haven't done so, I'd appreciate it. We're getting close to that 50 that we need to move on to the next step if I decide to do so. So I think we'll end it here. I've got some cleanup to do, and like I said, some off-stream steps that we'll do. We've got to wait for this paint to really cure before I can do anything else. And we'll go from there. So thanks for watching. This ended up being about an hour and 15 minutes longer than I thought it would be, but probably time to go relieve my wife of puppy duties for a while. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.